I'm always open to learn. I mean, every time I go somewhere, either it's work or personal, I know I don't know everything, and I like learning something new about myself because that makes me better at what I do.
Welcome to A Life Well Lived, where we pull back the curtain on the extraordinary lives of our remarkable members. I'm James Henderson, CEO of Exclusive Resorts. For me, travel's never been about the destination, it's always been about the company you keep. Over the years, I've crossed paths with some of the world's most fascinating, well-traveled individuals, each bound by a singular pursuit: to live not just well, but exceptionally. Their stories aren't just worth telling, they're worth learning from. Because in the end, it's not about where we go, but how we choose to live. In today's episode, we're joined by Tish Squillaro, executive coach, entrepreneur, and award-winning author. As the founder and CEO of Candor Consulting, she helps top leaders cut through the noise and build stronger teams. She's also the co-author of Head Trash, a book series on overcoming self-defeating thought patterns in business and in life. From launching one of the country's first doggy daycare businesses to advising Fortune 500 companies, Tish's career is a masterclass in resilience, adaptability, and knowing when to get out of your own way. We'll get straight into it. Look at your early career. You started out as an entrepreneur, and right after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, what inspired your entrepreneurial direction that you took? And how did that shape your approach to business leadership today?
So thinking back when I went to school, being an entrepreneur was not common. And when I was at school, I learned a little bit about marketing and business. But I initially went to school to be a lawyer because I had to put myself through college. So my first job out of school was right out of high school. Mm-hmm. I worked in a law firm. I got to see what the law firm world was like, and I thought, oh, I could do this. So that was always my mantra. I could do this. How hard could it be? How I got to Penn, which again is another story, is someone said, well, you can't go to an Ivy League school, Tish. You're from Brooklyn. I said, oh, really? So I worked my way with, okay, I never take no for an answer.
Good for you.
Got myself into Penn. And as I was there, I realized I don't even like law. So I had to then change everything I was doing, since I was paying for college, to fit in some sort of degree. And so from that, I took business classes. And I sat in a marketing class where the gentleman said, if you want a niche, you're going to find something that exists and you're going to do it a little differently. So I thought, okay, moving to Pennsylvania from New York by myself, I got a puppy. His name was Barney. And I thought, well, what happens when I get a job? Who's going to watch the dog? I said, I'm going to open a dog daycare and boarding. That'll be perfect. And that was my first thought about entrepreneurship. I was using a Doggy World little like daycare that was near us, but it was an outdoor just park. Mm-hmm. I said, no, we need a business like this. And really that was the spark of me opening it. I met someone in the park who seemed to have a similar interest. She and I didn't know each other at all. She was from Albany. I was from Brooklyn. We were both from the same state. We thought, okay, let's try this. And we opened up Doggy World Daycare 5 months later with no news on how to even run a business, no training on a dog caring, but we loved animals, and that was like my first real shot at giving myself a shot, but trying it on myself.
And this is just pure chance you met?
It was a challenge. I mean, I think my whole life, if someone said I couldn't, that was my resourcefulness who said, really? Why not?
Good for you. That's fantastic. And how long did you do that for?
So Doggy World Daycare was probably 7 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. It started out where I did it full time.
Yep.
And then we realized it wasn't going to be the galactic enterprise that I loved. I mean, I love being around the animals, but I also would go dressed like this. And my business partner was in sweat. She goes, you can't wear a dressy outfit and go pick up dog poopy all day. You need to come dressed ready. I said, yeah, I don't know if this lifestyle is for me. I said, but I do the marketing and the business. So then I created the whole brand. Mm-hmm. And then we sold it after about 7 years because our lives changed.
Yeah.
She got married, had a baby. I had met my future husband. And we thought, okay, maybe it's time. And so from that, I started the corporate world with the thoughts of the dogs in mind.
Yep.
Always, though.
And so what was that shift when you moved from the doggy daycare business into the corporate world? And that was more into shift into sort of organization, human capital, strategy. What was that shift that you did there?
again, nothing about me is planned. I knew I had to get a job. And, you have a resume with, University of Penn. And then the first job out of college was doggy-rolled daycare.
Yeah.
And people would look at me and say, what's wrong with you? Because back then, this was 30 some odd years ago, being an entrepreneur wasn't even an option. Being a female entrepreneur wasn't an option that people recognized. So they said, what happened? You couldn't get a job after college? I said, no, I opened my own business. Someone liked me, gave me a shot, and said, maybe you could be a recruiter. You seem very salesy. And so that's what I did. I started out in recruiting, and from there morphed myself into doing what I do today, which is more change management, but it's people development. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't, because having a resume without having corporate America on it made it very difficult for me to get taken seriously.
And so what gave you your first break in that world?
I placed myself as a recruiter into someone's business as the head of HR with no HR experience whatsoever. So be prepared. You can make anything happen.
Yeah.
Took that job on, and I liked it, but I'm much more salesy, I think. So what happened, the company went under because of 2000's internet explosion.
Yeah.
And they downsized. And they said, well, why don't you run sales? I said, I don't know anything about sales. So I didn't do that. Instead, I said, well, why don't you hire me as a part-time? You still need what I offer. Take me on for hours, and I'll start a business, and you can just utilize me as on the go. And that was how Candor came about in 2000.
And so you were consulting for them
For them.
with Candor.
Which then got me meeting other companies and selling my services. And before you know it, I had clientele. I was like, I don't think I can ever get a job again. I love doing this. I really love working for me.
And what was a typical assignment in those days that you did?
Well, back then, it was finding talent.
Yeah.
So I got really good at picking and understanding what they need, and when I meet someone, what they're really saying. Because there is there is a listening skill to understand what someone's telling you and what they actually really can do. So I was very good at placing the talent. I also was able to understand people dynamics. I could tell when people were not being upfront and honest. I can tell when people weren't getting along. And I became a great mediator. So I would come in and try to diffuse where there was tension and friction, always in the same areas: finance and sales, marketing and analytics. And they were just a start of a trend I started to pick up on.
Yeah.
But the biggest break was when I started working with international companies, because the language and culture was always very difficult for people to accept.
Yeah.
And I used to work more solely on getting them to just communicate.
So the books you've written we'll talk about in a moment, but talk about the name Candor as well. It seems like a very intentional decision.
There's a story with everything, James. I needed to come up with a business name because I was in a partnership with a group of gentlemen, and we all broke up. And I had to open my own business like almost overnight. And I was like, well, I need a name that speaks for what I do. And because it was consulting, names and consulting never really jive. So what is it that represents me? So I hired a marketing person, and the plan was to sit around, talk about what I do, how I do it. And about halfway through the meeting, he goes, stop. I have the name of your company. Tish, you're Candor. There isn't a thing you don't say that's direct, upfront, and to the point. I think you should just name your company Candor. And that's really how we built the business from there. And it was always me and a couple of people that would support what I do. I tried growing the business and having additional staff, but I think what I offer is me.
Yeah.
So if I'm not selling me to be me, then I think people are not as happy. So I kept it small, boutique, and Candor just says what you're going to get. And I think people are very comfortable with that.
I think it's very true. I think it certainly epitomizes your personality. You're very candid about things, which
hopefully on the positive side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's great things. I think in today's day and age, people aren't so often, are they? Right? I think people tend to sugarcoat things, and they tend to worry about how things land and things like that. So I think being candid and being direct is very refreshing.
If someone wants to hear it, I do think there's a delivery mechanism. So something my mom said to me years ago: it's not what you say, but how you say it. And of course, as a child, I rolled my eyeballs and okay, Mom. But the truth is, it really is in the delivery. So there's candor out there that's radical, that I don't believe in, that it should be so rough and shocking. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that's what I mean by my candor. It's just that I want you to know what you need to know. And most times in businesses, people just want to please or tell you what you want to hear. And so when I'm hired to come in and work with a team or an individual, I always tell them, be ready for me. First 30 days, you're not going to love me. I'm going to tell you stuff no one's told you, but I promise it's for you. And if you're ready for that, we can work together. So I always give people an opportunity to cancel any program after 30 days because you'll know what you're getting by then.
That's good. What you see is what you get. I like it.
That's right.
That's great. So you've written 2 books. Can you share the origin of the head trash concept and story and how you came up with that?
So I'm not an avid book reader. So when I told my husband I'm writing a book, he goes, "You don't even read. How could you write a book?" I said, "Because I think I can," right? We were working.
There's a theme coming through here.
Yes, I'm resilient and resourceful, and I hate the word no. I always seem to work around that. And I tell my children that. You should never take no for an answer. At least figure out why it's no. If it's really no, there's a reason. If it is no just because, then it's not good enough. But with Head Trash, I was co-working on a project with another consultant. And we had just difficulties with one CEO doing what he said he'd do. And not that he did it on purpose. I just think he lost his confidence to do it. We set up what he had to say. We wrote all the memos. We delivered the speech to him. And then at the 11th hour would never follow through. And I sat next to my co-author's named Tim Thomas. I sat next to Tim. I said, "What is the problem? I mean, we have to stand there and do it for him?" He goes, "No, it's his head trash." And I stopped and said, "Head trash? I love that. What is that?" He goes, "Well, you know, it's that junk up here that gets in your way and you can't see clear." I go, "Tim, we should write a book about that. That is awesome." He says, "What do you know about writing a book?" I said, "Nothing, which is going to make it perfect." And hence, that's where Head Trash came from.
Fascinating. So you were working with Tim at the time. He was working with you.
We each had our own businesses, but we collaborated.
Yeah.
Sometimes I was brought in. Sometimes he needed my type of expertise, and mine would be the one-on-one coaching, and his was more facilitation. So he would do more group settings, and this was a more coaching. So he asked me to come in and work with him.
And so in the book, you focus on 7 behaviors.
Amazing emotions.
Emotions, exactly. Fear, arrogance, insecurity, control, anger, guilt, and paranoia. So what led you to identify those 7 specific things? What was the sort of the basis of that?
We started with 12. So if you think about it, we were trying to get to the root cause of where someone stops and doesn't do the thing they should.
Right.
And so it took 3 years to write that book because we wanted to use real world experiences. Of course, the book doesn't say any companies or names, but they're all real stories, real stories, which is why it's a great book to learn from because someone's actually lived it. So it's not fabricated. And we had 12, and we had to whittle down what the core issue was. Because when you're solving a problem, you always want to get to the core. And if you're working around the ancillary parts, you won't always cure what the problem is.
Yeah.
And we whittled it down to these 7 because every time we found a challenge on either a business situation or a person's difficulties to do something, it was one of these 7.
Yeah.
And then we just created stories around how these caused head trash. So all the emotions are everyday emotions. We should never get rid of emotion. It is what makes us who we are and how we're human. But when it crosses the line, right? I call it the line crossing. It goes from a healthy emotion to unhealthy. And that's where the head trash becomes part of the challenges.
So there are 2 books. The first one is how to deal with your own head trash. And the second one is how to deal with other people's.
Well, the first is identifying.
Okay.
And we did a book tour where we promoted it on radio and television. And everyone kept saying, "Well, if I don't have it, Tish, how do I recognize it in someone else?" Of course, we all have these emotions.
Arrogance element there that sort of comes
or denial, right? Fear. But it gave us the thought process. We wrote it very much as a business book.
Yeah.
And I wanted to appeal that it's a life thing. And so the second book came from that really conversation that people don't always recognize they have it. And I also wrote it with life stories instead of just business stories.
Yeah.
Like if you read the second one, I talk about being an Italian Catholic at the dinner table and how guilt is a neighbor right next to you at the table. Because in families, everyone's got, guilt of some sort. So that was how the second book really came about, more from a life experience. Because I do think people don't recognize that they have the full control to really better themselves as long as they don't blame someone else. And that's really part of the book's premise.
So let's dive into a few of these and talk about how each of these can be self-limiting and how you deal with
how they cross the line from healthy to unhealthy.
A little bit, exactly. Okay. And also when you deal with other people exhibiting these behaviors or you want to deal with it yourself. So in fear, you talk about the fear of speaking up the non-results of a soft approach, and that no decision is the worst decision.
Both in life and business, you get yourself stuck, right? And I think, head trash is going to be a form of getting stuck, but fear is the most, because it's when you don't do anything. And if you think about it, it's like a stop sign versus a caution sign. Life, to experience things, you have to open doors, try new things, and be comfortable with not knowing. Like life's uncertainties is sometimes exciting. But when you do nothing and you stop and you don't use your voice or you don't make a decision, which was funny enough how the book was started, that individual had fear because he could not make the decision of what needed the business to do. And, those are the elements that if you find yourself stuck, we're going to blame everyone around us. But I always ask people, is it them or you that's stuck? Like, what's stopping you? And so some of the remedies are, let's not look at it as a whole project. Let's look at bite-sized challenges, because everyone can take a baby step. And so when someone has fear, the key is look at the big thing you're trying to accomplish. Now break it down into step one. Everyone can take the first step. Do that. You start to gain confidence. And then you go to step two. Before you know it, you look back. And I usually use skiing as an example. I'm always afraid to ski. I mean, I learned very late in life. I'm cocky, so I thought, oh, who can't do this? It's tough to come down that mountain with these little skis when you don't know what you're doing. But I always look back up and go, wow, I did that. Because I went down slowly. So same order. Fear is you got to give yourself the chance. But no one knows all the way through where we're going, so take the first step.
Yeah. I have a thing that I talk about a lot in the company that, so I do, when we've had people in the company for 3 months, I do sort of an onboarding session. So I get maybe whoever's joined the company in the last 3 months. I do it when they've joined, so they've got a sense of the organization and they know what questions to ask and things. And we spend an hour and we talk, and it's really fun because they ask questions about the business and things. And one of the things that I always try to encourage is I try to encourage people to step outside of their comfort zone and do something that gives them that little bit of fear every day, because I want people to try stuff. Because I believe if you try something and you're outside of your comfort zone, you do something new that you didn't think you were capable of doing, it really expands your capabilities, and that's great for the company, right? As long as we have a sort of environment where we embrace failure a little bit, and we fail forward, we fail fast, we allow people to make mistakes, but that's how you grow.
Yep.
It's interesting also, a lot of the like when I look back at a lot of the members that I meet and people in the club, so many people have done that, right? They've done things that are just, it's a bit of risk, and they take it and they look and they leap and they've achieved these amazing things.
Well, it's like my husband, he said, Tish, when I met you, I knew I needed to wear a seatbelt. I knew it was going to be fun and crazy, and I wanted that, but I needed a seatbelt because it could be bumpy, which is, you have to understand that when you take chances, they don't always work out the way you thought, but you learn from it.
Yeah, you do. You never know where it leads to either.
No, and things always lead to somewhere.
Yeah.
They really do.
Yeah. So let's talk the next one. You refer to arrogance as a personal blind spot that others can't miss, and the arrogance trap as being self-defeating.
So arrogance is actually a good thing. I mean, it is confidence. It's our society that made arrogance, like ego, a problem.
Yeah.
If you're confident, you should be, right? You should be comfortable in who you are and what you're about. But when you stop listening to others, so that's the fine line of the head trash where it crosses over. If arrogance means what James has to say doesn't matter, I know better, that's arrogance. But if you say, James, I don't know if I agree with that. I have this view. That's arrogance as well, but that's healthy. It's just having a conversation. So to me, the biggest, challenge for leaders is to the listening skills.
Yeah.
And so when you don't have them, and it doesn't mean listen to pound and answer. It means listen to digest and wait. And that's a hard skill for many to learn, but that's the form of arrogance where you cannot sit still and let someone else say something and you then ponder on it and think about it.
Yeah. But it's also I think there's also an element there of trying to be self-reflective, right? How do you then figure out, if you have arrogance, how do you then figure out that that's something that's limiting you?
Well, if you say no, you have it.
Fair enough.
I always say, if you say you don't have it, we all have a little bit of it.
Yeah, we do.
But if you say no, you're not self-aware.
Yeah. I think a little bit is a good thing. But it's how much you use
I'm
it.
clearly sure I have it.
Yeah.
My kids tell me I have it. Mom, you always think you know everything. I said, well, I do.
There you go, self-reflective. That's how it should be. So the next one we talked about was insecurity, you write. And the insecurity leads to procrastination, which I think a lot of us have.
Yeah, insecurity is tough because it's your own voice.
Yeah.
Arrogance, it's different because it's others around you that you get confident with. The insecurity is you just don't believe in you. And I've seen it a lot. in business, because it's when people have the imposter syndrome. Oh my goodness, I can't do that. And so when you get stifled by that, you won't bring other people around you who might be smarter, who know things better than you might, who can teach. And so that then limits you to be stuck in your little world.
Yeah.
And you use the blame game because it's always everyone else, and you become like the victim when why you didn't do certain things. So it's one of those things that I always tell people, if you really don't believe you've earned it or you should deserve something, give yourself a chance to write down all the things you're good at, because you're filled with all the things you can't do. But just remind yourself what you are good at. And that starts to give you your own self-confidence back in, because it is your own voice that you're listening to. And that's why sometimes it's hard for someone else to help you through insecurities. You have to believe that voice is going to turn around and make it positive, because usually it's rather negative.
Yeah. I had it's one of my friends, he has a business, and they talk about a similar business to you, and they talk about self-image and outperforming your self-image. And they said that, you can never outperform your self-image. So you almost have to reset that self-image in certain ways. And you do that either through finding great coaches or mentors or people that believe in you and that can do more than you think you can do, or you reprogram it, like you write a self-image statement or something like that. So how did people push through that? So how can someone that is feeling insecure really become a leader through determination, resilience, and how do they get beyond that?
I do think it's actually being more comfortable with the things you do well, and give yourself a break that you're not supposed to do everything perfectly, right? I do think that perfect syndrome is part of it. And as you're navigating the things you do well, stick to those. Same thing with coaching. People ask, can you change me? I go, absolutely not. I'm not here to change anyone. Matter of fact, I'm here to actually emphasize what you are good at, recognize what you're not, and utilize others around you for support or figure out ways to improve, but not change. So I think it's just getting comfortable with what you're good at. And I think today most people are much more comfortable talking about what they're not good at.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem.
And how do you think this has changed? I think we were talking this yesterday when we were at dinner. This whole thing of, like, in today's day and age, young people who have come through COVID and haven't had these sort of personal interactions, I think that just leads to greater levels of insecurity, doesn't it?
Yes, I do think social media and technology is wonderful, and it gives us a lot of avenues. But if you don't know how to utilize it, and you don't make it guide you and tell you what you should be doing, it's going to be hard for you to navigate that. So in COVID, I think it became a lifeline, and people are still using it, though, as their lifeline. And I do think we have to give other opportunities for people to interact with people. Like what I found with businesses that's changed in a good way about the work remote sort of conversations is these team group offsites. And I've been in business for 25 years, and an offsite would be something they just put together the night before. Everyone was going to be there anyway, and it was just a continuation of what we always do. Today, it's a conscious, purposeful effort, because you're gathering people, which is a novelty now altogether, and you want to make it extra special. So what I've seen come from COVID in a good way is that these dynamic moments are becoming dynamic. They should have been, and they weren't before. And I see a lot of that. I fly to Germany. I'm all over the world to do these sessions that I do with teams, which years ago, it wasn't done with that same special focused purpose. So I think doing those sorts of things, because our youth has become very comfortable not doing that, we need to make purpose and reason. Because once you're there, and I hear it, I overhear people say, God, that was great. We should get together. When do you go to the office again? It starts to give people memories of what, and that's what our youth doesn't have. If you really grew up in your professional world during COVID, you don't have a memory of what's it like to be by the water cooler, or grab nuts with everybody, or just sit in the lounge and someone walks over and you start talking, right? You don't know what that's like. So I do feel that we need to create those environments so that we can get people to actually enjoy them.
So you talk about that in doing this in sort of offsites and things, but how do you do that in an office environment day to day? Especially now, because now we're trying to get people back into the office as well and get people interacting. So how does that work?
It's not a foos table. It's not better snacks. And I do think that was a big thing for a while. I think it's creating an environment where people can learn and enjoy one another's company. So it could be more social. It could be defining something educational in the market. Sometimes people don't understand what's happening in the world. Maybe you'll have someone come in and speak about, truly what's going on in a certain environment. People actually are thirsty to learn because the internet's made it so comfortable. You can learn something in 5 seconds. Just talk to Siri.
Yeah.
She pops up, and before you know it, you're an expert. But are you really? And so I do think today what gravitates people together is learning about something they care about. And there's so many things that you can do within an office environment besides the work, because I don't want to, repeat, we are there to work, but there should be things that make it also about them. And I think if you just combine the two, you'll probably get, once or twice a month where you get everyone to come in.
So when you do these offsites you talk about, what are you specifically looking to achieve in these offsites when you take people out and do these 2 or 3 days?
When you're building a business, you find skill and need for the company. And so when you're hiring people, you're not always thinking about the cultural fit. But we like to say we do, but I'm not sure we make hires that way. When now you have these terrific, great, talented people all around the table, and typically I work with leadership teams, and I reference them as the first team, because that is the team that's supposed to take off their function hat and put on the business hat for the business. When you get them around the table, there is transparency and trust issues because everyone's goals as an individual are different than they are collectively as a team. So I'm really re-educating the teamwork environment, and I do it by making them more self-aware of how they impact each other individually and how that fosters the team's results. And we can spend a whole day on understanding how Bob or Mary really could talk to each other differently, how Sue enters a room and the whole dynamic changes. You learn about human behavior through the use of 3 areas: trust building, decision making, and really just understanding the value of supporting one another. Those are the 3 main things I focus on.
And I guess all of that is held together by collaboration, isn't it, in these sorts of environments?
People don't even know how to collaborate.
Yeah.
I mean, collaboration means you're listening. So if you don't have good listening skills, it also means you're willing to give up, sacrifice for another, which is not something we normally do so easily. And so collaboration is understanding what's needed and then being able to know that you will not get it your way.
Yeah. Which is a nice segue into the control element here, isn't it?
Which always wants things their way.
Yeah, exactly. We all do a little bit, right? I think there's an element of that. I think, I always talk about the need to sort of hire up in an organization, right? Because there's always a temptation when people move on and they take bigger roles, they have to find a successor. And you want to find someone that can do that role better than you can do that role, and you can expand. But I think that's always getting that sort of understanding and sense and engendering that within an organization to have people do that is an important thing. One of the things you say here about control, which I like, is you wrote, successful people recognize achievement and reward it by expanding responsibilities. They enhance their ability to manage a growing enterprise by sharing control and encouraging everyone to reach their full potential. Giving your best players the space and autonomy to be outstanding enables you to hold on to them longer. I really believe in that. It builds powerful teams from within and attracts the best talents from outside the business. Great leaders make their organizations talent magnets by distributing leadership and decision-making responsibilities rather than hoarding. That's awesome. Talk about that.
It was good writing, yes.
Yeah, it's good writing.
So many years ago. It's about empowerment, right?
Yeah.
I do think, well, first of all, controls are important, right? So I don't want you to think that we shouldn't have some sort of boundaries and protocols. And the people are actually more comfortable, if there are boundaries and protocols. They actually perform better. It crosses the line when, 3 things will happen. 1, you do everything, which means no one's empowered. You have not learned how to delegate to help others grow and learn from their mistakes. So you have a culture of fear where people can't make mistakes. And 3, it's about recognizing that it doesn't have to be perfect.
Very true.
And people who struggle with control think everything is perfect, and that's why they do it. But that's not scalable. So in a company, the best leaders are the great delegators. And there's a way to delegate. And I use this in my sessions, which I think would be helpful for those who are trying to figure out how and when to delegate. I look at it from a Tupperware and China column of lists. Not everything is China, but we think it is. So when you think about your tasks that you're going to delegate and you want to give others to do for you or for the company, put this list together. And if it's China, it means if it falls and breaks, it shatters, that's not getting back together, right? There isn't a crazy glue to put it back together. But Tupperware, if it falls, nothing really happens.
Yeah.
I always joke, Tupperware, the most that happens is you lose the covers, because you always lose your covers on your Tupperware, right? You never find them. But you don't ruin it. And when you start to make those lists and honest with yourself, you probably have a long list on the Tupperware side. Very few things are China. And I say, keep the China, but start delegating the Tupperware.
You also say, the other thing you say about control is talk it before you walk it, then praise, ask, or offer versus just do.
Because when you have a control dynamic, and all of us know it's quicker if I just do it. I mean, I used to learn this with my kids in bed making. So I wanted my kids to learn how to make their bed very young, because I thought I always made my bed. That is a thing in which you feel complete before you head your day out. And they'd make it terribly. And I'd have to run by the room like this not to remake it. And my husband would say, you're going to make their bed when they're 40? Leave it. They're going to come home. They're going to get in it. And the next day, just make a comment about what they might do differently.
Yep.
And so over time, they got perfect at bed making. So it's the same thing. You have to know that someone's not going to do it exactly like you do.
Yeah.
Their first couple of tries, it's not going to be perfect, but they're doing it. And today, my kids in college and on vacation still make their bed before they leave the room.
They make yours as well?
No, we haven't gotten
Okay,
that.
haven't got quite that
Not
far.
gotten that done.
Pretty good though. But it's so true though, isn't it? It's so easy the temptation is just to sort of do it yourself.
I would have to run like this past the room. And my husband's name is Matt. He's like, you're not going to fix it, right? Don't go fix it. So there's my own control.
There you go. So let's move on to anger, which I think is positive.
Which is my number one, by the way.
Negative, is it? So I like this Mark Twain quote that you put in the book. Anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured. So talk about anger. What's the positive and negative of anger? How do you manage that?
It was shocking that was mine. So when I created the book with Tim, we also created a test or an algorithm around getting folks to become comfortable. What are your top sort of head trashers? And I can definitely get that. It's an easy survey, and out of it you'll get your top 2 scores. Mine was anger. And so before we rolled out the book and this algorithm, I did a test pilot with 15 of my good friends and family. And we all went around the table and talked about what their number 1 was. I said, oh my God, this is wrong. Mine says anger. Everyone around the table go, no, that's right. Because my ability
you get angry and tell them that's wrong.
Right. I was like, what do you mean? That can't be right. My anger is when you have an immediate reaction. And it's not a positive one. But it's also the strength of me, because when folks have told me no, or you shouldn't, or how could you, I use that same anger, or at least my resilience, to push myself. So again, the healthy crossing the line. Anger is when you have not put the control in how you're going to show someone how you feel. And, it's not easy. I have something called the invisible zipper. So I know when I'm getting upset, if it's my children or a situation, I can feel it bubbling up from inside, and I know I'm going to explode. So I have to do something. And for me, I just go like this. And no one knows or understands what I'm doing, because it's like not that obvious. I'm reminding myself, don't say it, Tish. Because that's what happens when anger crosses the line. You react. So if you see me go like this, it means I'm thinking about something that's not pleasant.
But there's 4 types of anger you talk about, right? You talk about hostility, nonverbal, disappointment, and resentment. Because they're all very different, aren't they? And people do it in different ways. Because I tend to go quiet. If I'm like really angry about something, I tend to go quite quiet.
And everyone around you probably knows.
And they know.
Because James is very comfortable
and
talking. And when you're quiet, they're like, uh-oh.
And then when I do get really angry, they know like I'm really, really, really angry about something.
And I do think it's how people show their expression. So that's why there's 4. Like we found 4. Because the nonverbal is the one that most people don't even catch. And I'll never forget how we figured that out. There was a gentleman who would always go like this. And then there were 2. And then there was this. And his team would tell us, well, look, we only got this, so he's not too upset. But when we get this, we know he's really upset. I was like, oh my goodness, these nonverbal cues people could read. So one of the elements I would do with coaching is like, when you're not happy, what do you do? And people don't have a mirror watching themselves. So it's an education to realize that if you're not yelling, it doesn't mean you're not still yelling.
So the antidote, if you can call it that, to that is really about knowing what your triggers are and knowing when you're starting to sense it and then how you're going to deal with it.
That's every one of them, by the way, is I always get to the root cause and say, what are your triggers?
Yeah.
Because then you can manage them. You're never going to get rid of, I will always react. Some days I'm better than others, but I know my triggers. And I know the relief I have to do, which is don't say it, walk around the room, write the email, don't send it. I know I'm an action-oriented person, so I know I need to do something. You can't tie me up. That'll make it worse. But then I also know not to use it. Yeah. So it's just knowing you, because everyone's going to manage themselves differently, knowing your triggers and what you need to kind of release it before one of them take over on you.
I'm a big believer in the 24-hour email room.
I'm the same way.
It happened this weekend. One of my colleagues, actually, she wrote an email, and I'm like, don't send that. Take a deep breath. Walk around the block. Let's talk about it Monday.
But I live with the 24-hour life rule, which is 24 hours to be happy, 24 hours to be upset, 24 hours to be sad. So I never live the emotion more than 24 hours.
So that's interesting. But how do you manage that? How do you say, okay, I've been 24 hours happy or sad or upset?
It's the next day. And there are many things in my life that were not pleasant and tough.
So when you say 24 hours, you say, today's a new day, I'm starting today. And
I wake up and say, you know what, that was yesterday.
It's a reset.
And in some cases, it really helps.
Yeah.
In others, where that's not my husband's rule, he's like, can we celebrate a couple of days on the good news? I go, no, we had the champagne toast. We did it last night. We start all over again. He goes, But for me, that's how I've actually coped with things that weren't pleasant. And since I'm an action-oriented person, I need to make it for everything I do, right? So 24 hours I could be, and I tell that to my kids, it's a bad day. You didn't get into the school you wanted. You didn't get that job you needed. Let's be upset for the day. Tomorrow, we wake up different.
Yeah, that's smart. I like it. I'm going to remember that. So let's move to guilt. So guilt, and you refer to guilt as being a double-edged sword. Inflicting guilt versus feeling guilt, and feeling guilt versus feeling compassion. So how does guilt hold us back, and how do you deal with it?
So guilt comes in two forms, right? There's the person that gives guilt. So that's guilt wielding, where you are offering guilt to someone by, gee, James, I'm doing this podcast with you. Let's, tomorrow I'm going to take your Maserati out for a spin. Like that's forcing guilt on someone. And then they're feeling guilty. Like, oh my goodness, I know that person forever. I have to let them sit in that job. How can I not give them that job? I can't have that conversation with them. So it's one of those things where you do have compassion on both ends. One for yourself, because you're doing a favor. The other is feeling badly. And what I have to remind people is, especially on the one with not having the tough conversation, that's a big business thing. And also in life. I mean, people are in relationships because they've never had the honest conversation that they should. And I always say to them, well, do you think the other person would want to know? Like who you're really helping.
That's good advice, yeah.
Right? I mean, I understand that they're not going to like the immediate reaction that the job's changing or the relationship's over. But pretending that everything's okay, who wins in this world that you're living? And so I get people more comfortable that who you're really doing it for, and that's what I reference, like who's really getting something out of it. Most times it's just being able to actually share and make someone you care about feel better. But by feeling better, don't not give them the real message.
But this is also back to what you said earlier. We were talking about the name of the company. Being candid, but doing it in the right way. Right. And
pleasant.
making sure the message lands in the right way.
Right. Oh, so I'm going to be pleasant and fair, but I'm going to tell you.
Yeah. I like it. So let's move on to paranoia. You talk about paranoia as being a distorted lens that taints everything, and the goal is to replace anxiety and suspicion with confidence and trust.
I would say, out of all the 7 emotions, this one it's tough because it's your feeling that you're the victim. And sometimes it's hard to work on that on your own, or even as a coach to help someone with that, because no matter what's happening around you, you think it's always about you. And so the one thing I usually tell people, well, why do you think they're saying that? Or why do you think they're talking about you? Like, what makes you that important that you think they're all snickering in the corner about you? And that starts to create reality.
Yeah.
The problem with paranoia is you're really in a not reality mode when you're thinking that way.
Yeah.
So it's a hard one. Companies are paranoid when they're successful because they think everyone's out to get them. And one example would be they don't have an org chart. I go, how could you not have an org chart? Well, suppose someone gets it, a recruiter. I go, they're getting you anyway. Put the org chart together. Everyone wants to know where everybody sits. So it's sometimes silly when you break down and you tell them, okay, why don't you have it? Or why do you think they're talking about you? And the reality is that's not the truth. And so you have to really unpack the the things that are causing them to think outside of reality.
But there's also, so a lot of the on all of the sort of the 7 behavioral traits, it feels like there's like a bit of a sliding scale, right? I mean, there's a sort of an element where there's an element that's healthy. I mean, I think it was Andy Grove that said only the paranoid survive or something like that, right? And so there's probably a little bit of healthiness in paranoia.
Absolutely. Paranoid is like making sure you cross your T's, dot your I's. Just because you're winning doesn't mean your competitor is not going to come next to you. Just because someone else has, not the same things you do, they're probably looking to have them. So you do have an edge that I think is healthy from a paranoid state, but not enough that you're actually making decisions based on what you think.
Yeah.
Let's make it reality first.
Yeah.
And that's all the emotions that we talk about. They are all healthy. I used to joke because when I lived in Philadelphia, I would travel to New York 4 days a week driving because the kids were little and I always wanted to be home. And I would go through at least 6 of the 7 on the way down. I would go through every one of those emotions because it's nerve-wracking to be driving, right? But they are healthy always to start. Where are the ones that become the challenge for you?
Yeah.
You may not have all 7. Like everyone probably won't. They'll have one though, which is why we created this little profile, is which is yours. Because when you start to conquer the triggers on that one, all the rest of them also will never become a problem for you.
So that self-awareness is important understanding.
It's the premise of my entire, I think, philosophy around working with people is to be self-aware.
So bringing this all together and encapsulating everything, you talk about the overarching theme being, as you identify these traits that you have, this idea of sweep it, bag it, and crush it. Talk about that.
Well, I want you to feel confident you can control it. So it's not about removing it. So when we wrote the books, some of the feedback would be, well, are we supposed to not have fear? And so it's not to, what I want you to do is first of all, identify it.
Yeah.
So the first book was really helping identify and define what these emotions were. Because we know what they are, but let me show you how they become crossing the line. The second is make sure you understand how it triggers and manage it. And crush it is just knowing, I got this. I mean, I don't think you're ever going to have it 100% because there are moments that my zipper doesn't work on my anger. But for the most part, I understand it. And so I can control it if I need to. And all I ever ask people to do is, be a person that has self of worth. And so when you're going to say things and do things, be able to look in the mirror about what you just did. Because if you can't, then we probably have to do a redo. It's a retake.
So of all these things, when you look back, you've coached hundreds of executives. So what is the most destructive form of head trash, do you think?
I would say consistently from the profile, so data, statistics, fear and control come up a lot. Because you can justify why I shouldn't take a chance, right? And doing nothing could be a good thing. And with control, it's because I have to do it right. Why wouldn't I want to be? But they're the stifling two behaviors that if I'm working with an organization, I'll look for. Because I have my own little checklist as I meet a team. I always say it's the same movie, just different characters, right? Everything is based on those people in that room. But the 7 culprits are always the same. I need to figure out which one is actually the worst for this team. And I would say as you're thinking about them, those 2 would be my top from a team standpoint, for a company. From an individual standpoint, I would say, depending on the role, CEOs, founders, people in very high leadership roles, probably arrogance. And not arrogance from a ego, I'm better than you, not listening. I find that if you feel you know what you know, you stop listening because you don't need to know anymore. And I think we're always open to listening. So I would say arrogance from an individual standpoint is the one.
Interesting. So Head Trash 2, so the first book is really about outlining these things. And explain how to read the second book, Head Trash 2, and look through that lens on each of these.
It's really recognizing those around you.
Okay.
And I do think that's part of self-awareness. A, know yourself, then B, know your audience. And so what it does do is allows you to recognize in the environment you're living, where is their head trash? Because you will react to it. And it also made it easier for those to read the book who says, I don't have it. Let me see if my husband has it. So it's written from the lens of other people's head trash. How would you manage that? So it gives examples of what to do in that situation.
And it's also, I guess, if you're self-aware enough to understand what are your triggers for things, and you can see what other people's are, which are very different in many cases, right? So you can figure out what's the best way to approach some of those things. So let's move to teams for a second. You've done a lot of teamwork.
Yes.
What, in your experience, are the key elements that really contribute to strong team chemistry, and how can leaders foster this within their organizations?
So teams typically struggle with trust. And trust then envelopes into bad decision making because we're not talking about the real issues. We're not addressing accountability. And if you think of Pat Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions, which is a big part of what I try to get teams comfortable with, what are those effective behaviors we need? Trust is the pyramid's foundation, right? Every team's foundation should come from trust. And trust is earned.
Yeah.
So it's not, you can't ask for it. You have to show it in your actions. So every time I'm working with a team, that's the first thing I look to see as a barometer.
Yeah.
How strong is the trust around the table?
Yeah.
And that leader of that group, do they emulate a way to have a safety zone so that you can be trusted or use trust?
It takes a long time to build and it's very quick to lose trust, isn't it?
Yes.
And then in change management, what do you see as some of the common pitfalls people face during change management? What are the things there that you would look at? And how do you identify them as you're making changes in the organization? What are the things there that you look for, and how do you overcome those things?
It's usually communications. And I don't mean are we talking, because we're all talking and we're in meetings and we're using words, but are we talking about the right things? And, transparency is important in both communication and so is collaboration, which means you're listening as well as talking, but you're also talking about the stuff we're supposed to tell. And so often when I'm coming in for changes, which is typically when I'm in an organization, something's happening or we're going to be doing something, if you can communicate about what it is, you don't always have to divulge everything.
So the why.
But if you can give people the why it's happening or how you got to this thought or maybe the milestones or steps we're going to take, I think you can deliver any message, even the worst of information that you might have to share, because people then feel in the know.
Yeah,
and they don't have to worry that something's happening to them. And so I always tell folks, I'm not suggesting we share things that we're not ready to share. But I am suggesting we communicate what's going on because they realize something is going on.
Yeah.
And so if we don't deliver the message, they're going to create their own message.
Yeah.
And it's typically not the message in your favor. So let's come up with the right message and then keep people in the loop. And so that's probably the biggest thing in change management. If you're getting ready to have a big change, if you're in the midst of change, constant communications around what's going on as best you can will keep people engaged and build trust.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to do as a leader.
Yeah.
You want to build and foster an environment where trust is really the nucleus of what's going to make this team work.
Great advice. I always find that whenever we're doing sort of changes in organizations, I find that if I paint the picture of where we want to go and why we're getting there, when you explain that to people, they understand the rationale behind it, the why behind it. And quite often they'll find their own way to it.
That's right. Never underestimate someone's ability to figure it out as long as you give them the pieces of the puzzle. If you don't, they're going to still try to figure something out, but usually it's the wrong puzzle. We're not even on the same game.
Yeah. So let's talk about, one of the things that I think a lot of people are dealing with right now, we're dealing with it also, is this transition from, going through the pandemic era where we had this remote working environment. We're now down to back to like 2-3 days a week in the office. We're trying to encourage people to come back in. And I think this is also something that is with this next generation, Gen Z particularly. What are the biggest shifts in this that you think leaders need to prepare for right now in terms of getting people back in the office? And what is your philosophy on that? Do you believe in remote environments, semi-remote environments, or people being back in the workplace?
Having worked for over 25 years, I like that there's a hybrid. I have to say the 5-day work week is grueling. Yeah. And I get it. But I also think people like my children going into the workplace have never experienced community and building a community in the work environment. And I remember back then, it was also my social environment because you're meeting people, you're with them for 8-9 hours a day. You also built your social community. So that's kind of lost. So I am a fan of a hybrid. I do think you have to pick and choose some boundaries that people need because discipline is important. And I always think about our dogs. When I started the dog business, we had a dog trainer. And she would tell us discipline is actually healthy. And the animal wants it. So come up with rules and boundaries so that they feel safe. So having no rules and no boundaries, I do think sometimes lend people to make bad choices. So I like the hybrid work And I like that you pick 1 or 2 days that all people should try to come in, because the whole purpose of coming in is to see other people. I think it's silly if you're coming in and no one's there. That doesn't make sense to me. With the changes, like I said earlier, I do think the communal offsites and teamwork has become more purposeful.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we're going to see more of,
Yeah.
because it puts a precious connotation on time, someone's time. It's time to get somewhere, time that you're spending together. I think having the boundaries that it is work, and work has hours, and we want to trust you, but sometimes you might need some structure to help you.
Yeah.
Let us help you with some structure. I look at it as structure, not rules. So I do think we need to put some structure around what is the working environment. I work 24/7. In my business, if someone needs me, I'm there for them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to work 24/7, but you do have to recognize, to get your work done, you also have to work and collaborate with others. So there is an hours that people are working. We have to be fair to that. It is a job. And I think somehow through COVID, job and personal life and your personal space and what's important to you got cloudy.
Yeah.
And I do think companies are trying to figure out, how do I remind people this is the job, not just an extension to your day at home. And that's kind of the boundaries we're working with.
So you think the work-life balance, the sort of remote working thing, is here to stay?
I think it's going to be hard to go back, because we've experienced that, we can do it.
Yeah.
We get more work done. I mean, I used to commute 6 hours a day when I would go to New York, and that was just the drive. Then I had a full day.
Yeah.
So I do think we're seeing you don't have to be in an office to get work done.
Yeah.
So I do think we're going to have this remote for a while, and I do think that's good. I do think we in America we live to work instead of work to live, right? There is the Europeans always used to have a month off. I would die for a month
Still
off.
do.
I was like, or even maternity leave. You get a year. I was like, oh my God, it's 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So I do think we're learning that life needs to recognize, to live it. You don't do that when you retire.
Yep.
Because we're not all going to make it sometimes to have everything we want during those years. So I do think it's here to stay. I just don't know yet, because companies haven't all agreed on what is going to be the work hybrid. And I think if some are doing one thing and others are doing something else, it's going to make it hard for us to figure out what that balance looks like. It's going to take a couple of years, I would imagine, if not a decade, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. So that's a nice transition to my next question, which is a bit about work-life balance. So one of the goals in this podcast series that we're doing is really about transformation, and through experiences, through travel, and through learning. So have you ever had a trip or experience that's completely changed your perspective, either personally or professionally?
Well, travel is important to me, so I should start with that. When I was growing up, we didn't have a lot. And my mother and father would travel, but my sister and I never got to go away. So I always envisioned travel was how I wanted to spend my leisure time.
Yeah.
And so meeting my husband, he too. So we both love to travel. But you do it in stages, in environments where your life is, what you can afford. And if you have children, you do certain types of trips. And so we're at the stage now where our kids are grown. So we're enjoying travel more from a luxury standpoint versus taking the kids to explore things with us. We had probably 2 trips that were really life-changing. One was an African safari, which got us to realize animals and the world of nature and how much we're alike, but how foreign we are in our world from what they live. So that was an amazing, our kids till today still say that was the best trip we've ever been on. And we've been on tons of beautiful trips. The other was when we were in Alaska and we went on a whale watching and bubble feeding right happened. We were almost in the middle of their feeding. And that was just amazing because I never experienced anything like that. So I could go on. Every trip we've been on has brought my family closer together to build the memories that I know we're going to look back on, where when I grew up, I don't have any trip memories with my family. And so I think each one lends itself. Are some better than others? Of course. But I would say anytime we travel, like for example, we were in Sicily and we all learned how much we love to cook, except for my daughter who still puts everything in the freezer. She loves to eat. But my son, my husband, and I, we all learned so much from a cooking class that we took in Sicily that changed the way we cook. So it's just these little things that you learn about a culture or an environment that carve us. Like I feel like I'm a different person today because of all the trips I've actually taken.
I agree. So do you think travel makes people better leaders?
I do think travel makes you more well-rounded and appreciative of others.
Agreed.
So in that, yes. But I've known people who travel a lot and they're not the best communicators. So I don't know if it's the only component, but I do think if you could give yourself the experience of learning from others, yes, it's going to make you a better leader.
So we have a lot of young families in the club. And for people who are embarking on their career today, what advice, given all the things that you've seen in your consulting and all the things you've written about, what advice would you give to young people today that are embarking on their career in terms of how to navigate through all of the complexities of organizations that are often very complex environments?
God, that's a tough one. I mean, I probably would be a brilliant Nobel Prize winner if I had the answer for that. But I'll tell you what I would do if I was starting over. One, I do think trips are important.
Yep.
I would say if you could afford to go more than once, make those family trips where the kids have an experience.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't know to think that way. They take children on their trip. I do think you have them such a short period of time before they're on their own. And I'm living with they're on their own now. So we're reliving, my husband and I, our lives together. But during the family trips, make sure they're learning something.
Yeah.
So we've always tried to have either it's a cultural thing or something that they should see and know about the world or how others live. I think it should be an experience of that level. And know that they remember it at all ages. So don't think they don't. My kids remember pockets of things, but they can be anywhere and talk to anyone.
That's
and
a
they
great skill.
sound very worldly. And we
That's a
haven't
great
gone
skill.
that much travel,
Yeah.
but they know other things. And that allows them to have better food choices when they go out to eat, have conversations about anything and experience, see something they've never seen before and not react really weird. And we've always taken, if we could, some of their friends with us, because I don't think everyone always has the opportunity. And they would say, to us, Mr. and Mrs. Squillaro, we've learned so much of eating and travel through coming on your trips with you and your kids. So I do think it's a way to learn. That's how I look at it. It's an expense if you're going to use it. It'll be well worth it because your child and you as a family will build memories and learn.
Fantastic. So some quick questions for you, some rapid fire questions we have. Best leadership advice you've ever received?
It's not what you say, but how you say it.
Fantastic. One book every CEO should read. Apart from your own books, you can't put your own.
I would say Pat Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions, because if you are going to run a team, you need to know what doesn't make that team work well, and you have to really own resolving that.
Okay, that makes sense. Best decision you've ever made in business?
Staying a boutique. I did expand, and I learned that if you're very driven like I am, you think everyone is driven like you are, and I was constantly disappointed because they weren't.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, you know what? I think I'm going to keep it small and boutique-like, because then the only person I'm letting down is myself if I let myself down, and I've never let that happen.
Good for you. That's great. And how do you sharpen the knife? What do you do to stay mentally focused and balanced? And
I'm always open to learn. I mean, every time I go somewhere, either it's work or personal, I know I don't know everything, and I like learning something new about myself because that makes me better at what I do.
And so, last question for you: what's next? What do you have? Any exciting projects on the horizon?
I do, which I said I'd never do. I'm going to write a 3rd book.
Oh, you are?
I am. It's going to be on how to build a first team.
Oh, cool.
Because there are books out there about what to do when the teams aren't working well.
Yeah.
But, if you're new and you're a young entrepreneur and you've got to build a team, where do you start?
Yeah.
What are the top 2 or 3 things you should be looking for? What should you know about yourself as a leader? And so I'm going to take all the experience of the last 25 years and try to put it in a very short, because I like short, easy to read, book that is about you figuring out how to build a team so that you can have that sort of success as a group.
And are you going to use that based on, without wanting you to give anything away, but are you going to use that based on some of the sort of behavioral traits within the first 2 books?
Everything.
Or is this, so everything bringing all
Everything
together?
comes together, because I do think the work I do, which was never planned, so I'm not a planner. So I'd like to think years ago, I knew exactly this is what I was going to do. I'm not a planner.
Yeah, right.
And when I get through where I've gotten, I go, oh, that's what that was for. I guess this got me here. So I am going to just continue what I'm doing is one, being self-aware, because that'll help me build, again, teams. And as a team, be aware of your team and using the emotions that get in your way or understanding people's dynamics. All of it plays because people are predictable. And once you understand them, including yourself, the world is your oyster. You can be in control, you can chart your destiny, but when you don't know, you're lost. And so to me, that's what I never want to have someone be, is lost.
That's a great note to finish. Tish, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Fantastic summary.
Thank you, James.
Of
It
your
was
career.
fun.
And, it's been really fun having you on. Thank you. Stories like this are a window into what makes the Exclusive Resorts community unlike any other, filled with members who live with intention and travel without compromise. With more than 400 private residences and curated experiences around the world, the club continues to redefine the art of living well. Learn more at exclusiveresorts.com.